topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, welcome to Bill Martinez Live. Great to have you with us. I thought this would be a good time for us to get the inside skinny from somebody who's been there, bought the T-shirt, has worn it. The one and only former Colorado Congressman and businessman, Bob Beaupre, is going to be joining us to present an inside look at all things Washington, D.C., from the House Speaker, new challenges, support for Israel, Ukraine, possibly even Taiwan. Meanwhile, the pain of Bidenomics, inflation, cost of living continues to pulverize the middle class. And what about that border wall anyway? The administration can no longer run from the truth of an open border and its consequences for all Americans. If nothing else, it's distracted us from talking about the Biden brand corruption and the ongoing weaponization of our Justice Department. Bob Beaupre, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be with you, my friend. Always is good to talk to Bill.
Well, you're very kind. I've been looking forward to this because with all that's going on, Bob, as you know, not only here in the United States, but around the world, and we'll get into that in just a moment, but particularly here on all things Beltway, it is a mess right now. We got a problem in Congress where you served, and, the situation with Kevin McCarthy, no longer the speaker, and now it looks like Jim Jordan might be the favorite son. What do you say?
Well, I'd be fine with Jim Jordan. I was fine with Kevin McCarthy, frankly, and so was 96% of the Republican caucus.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah. I guess what irony of all ironies, Bill, that 8 recalcitrants, they accused McCarthy of the great sin of collaborating with Democrats to finally keep the government open. Mm-hmm. Okay, I get the criticism. But who did they collaborate with to roll McCarthy?
Exactly. That was
every single Democrat.
Exactly.
And 8 Republicans. So whose sin is the bigger? I would have been fine with Steve Scalise. I would have been fine. I'd be fine with Jim Jordan, but I don't know that he can get it done either. I guess we'll know maybe in the coming hours, coming days. But check the definition of dysfunctionality. And right. I think there's probably GOP right behind it. It's a very sad situation. We can joke about it. We can laugh about it. We can chat about it. But the reality is, this is hurtful to the country.
Exactly.
Obviously, at a time when we need all hands on deck and being able to row in the same direction. Mm-hmm. And it's I'm afraid it's got to hurt us as we go into another election season.
No question whatsoever.
The old saw, you win elections by addition, not by subtraction. Mm-hmm. This circus that we've seen too often within our own family. How many of those undecided voters that we're going to need to win the close ones, mm-hmm. and the next presidential will probably be a close one, and so will a whole lot of legislative, congressional and House as well as Senate campaigns. They'll be close too. In order to win those close ones, you've got to attract the unaffiliated voter. I don't see that we're doing much to attract them to our side right now. We better change our ways.
Well, I'll tell you, the Democrats are doing an end zone dance, because this is self-inflicted what the Republican Party did. They could learn something, from Israel. At a time of war, Israel decided they were going to unify the government. Put all things aside and realize you need to focus on that which is most important. You said all hands on deck. And I understand that is that the party itself, at a time when this country is unraveling and being pulled in different directions, as I mentioned earlier, from the Biden brand corruption, the weaponization of the Justice Department and every other three-letter agency in our government right now. In a sense, as you mentioned, thank God for Kevin McCarthy, because if he hadn't worked out that deal with the Democrats in order to keep the government running, what would we look like right now in the midst of what Israel is going through? Of course, the ongoing saga of Ukraine, and now, the ripe for the pickings, Taiwan.
Yeah, you mentioned Israel putting together a unified government, and they did that within hours, Bill.
Yes.
I mean, they just stepped up and did it on behalf of their nation.
Right.
If we want to stay on the subject of the funding the government deal that McCarthy cut, some people I think miss the fact that, what was there, 2 or 3 other options that were brought to the floor, all
Right.
rejected by the rebels,
Right.
and they actually contained real substantial cuts.
Mm-hmm.
They actually contained support for a secure border, some policy reformation, the stuff they've been asking for. But when I was there, and this wasn't unique to when I was there,
Mm-hmm.
we hear it all the time. You got to be careful not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Exactly.
And you've got 221 or whatever the number is Republicans. Every one of them thinks that they're the god of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've all got their own definition and got to march to their own drum.
Mm-hmm.
We love that independence, but at some point, you introduced me by saying I've got the team jersey. At some point you got to look down and realize what color are you wearing? Oh yeah, and ours is the majority color.
Exactly.
And act like a majority can govern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can have these conflicts back in the room somewhere where it's, where you need to work those things out. But when you come out, united. And this is a thing you can hand to the Democrats. I mean, they may be all wrong, but they're all wrong 100%. There's no deviation.
All in. When I was there, Bill, this is probably obvious to you, maybe to your viewers as well. But when I was there, you'd have those family squabbles about leadership. That's only normal. You'd have a couple of candidates for speaker. You might have a couple, 3 candidates for majority leader and whip, so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's normal. But almost every time, in fact, every time I can remember, when the votes were counted, and somebody obviously comes out with a majority,
mm-hmm.
Somebody would next stand up, almost immediately stand up, and often it was the defeated opponent of the victor would stand up and say, I move we cast a unanimous vote for the guy who just won the election. And everybody walks out of the room with telling the press and telling the whole world, we're united behind one leader.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I mean, for the sake of 8 people, we lost the speaker's chair, and I hope we don't lose it permanently come next November again. It's just an absolute travesty.
Well, it really is. And as you suggested earlier, Bob, on behalf of the American people, who's going to help the American people with the problems we got right now?
Right.
These democratic policies are quite clear in all the blue states. It's consistent miserableness that has overcome these blue states that have followed these democratic policies. Joe Biden has exacerbated the issue of inflation by killing coal. And it's like, it's clear that was one of the greatest contributors to inflation. And he doesn't want to do anything about it any more than he wanted to do anything about the border. He reluctantly said, okay, we'll build that fence thing, and it just galls him because all these things that Donald Trump did during the 4 years, in spite of all the resistance and hassle that he got from, Democrats and Nancy Pelosi and everything, look what he was able to do. And once again, the media has to reluctantly admit that Donald Trump was right.
Well, energy independence was achieved on his watch.
Yes.
And I mean, that not so very long ago,
Yeah.
Myself included, most of us thought that that was kind of a fantasy that, really, you think we can become energy independent? Well, we did. In fact, we began to export.
Yeah. And Bob, let me ask you this for all the environmentalists. We became energy independent. Did half the country float off into the ocean and, go by the way of what all the threats that Al Gore and others had talked about?
I for the life of me, Bill, I can't explain it. I can't reconcile where we're at in my own head. We're in a pretty good energy producing state ourselves.
Right.
Between Colorado, Wyoming, out here in the Mountain West, we produce not only a lot of oil, but an enormous amount of natural gas. And we've got a lot of coal reserves as well. And even here, I'm now sadly in a blue state in Colorado. And there's an article I just read this morning pointing out how our governor, Jared Polis, is trying to electrify the state. He's an anti-fracker, anti-oil and gas guy, very pro-wind and solar. Okay, fine. But why do you kill the goose that laid the golden egg?
Exactly.
Economies, it's pretty fundamental. An economy, especially one like the United States of America, not only survives, but expands on access to affordable, sustainable supplies of energy.
Exactly.
And even the most pro renewable energy advocates will tell you, if they're being honest, will tell you for the foreseeable future, the vast majority, 70, 75, 80% of our energy needs are going to be met by fossil fuels.
Exactly. Like it or not.
What Biden is doing, and our Governor Polis is doing, they are stoking the primary source of this inflationary crisis that's absolutely killing every American family that's trying to survive.
Well, particularly the middle class, Bob, as you know. Yeah. I mean, the middle class was pulverized under Obama, Biden, and Biden has just picked up a baton and he is just beating the heads of the middle class. And I mean, it's amazing to me that finally the middle class is waking up and realizing, what's going on. It's like, the blindfold's been taken off and they thought the people that were helping him were the exact, people that were doing all the damage and compromising. And, here it is, you got a little bit of a bump, a little bit of a raise, but that went vapored pretty quick once we started realizing the cost of living and inflation and the effects it started having on us. Real quick, we're talking with Bob Beaupre, the former Colorado Congressman and businessman, about all things that matter to you, not only in the Beltway, but, on Main Street America, right, Bob?
Yeah, stay on energy for just a little while. You're absolutely right about Main Street America. Almost everything we touch, everything we try to purchase, everything we need to take care of our way of life, from keeping our house warm, cool in the summer, feeding our kids, sending our kids to school, transportation back and forth to work. Everything depends on energy.
Exactly.
And I'm sure people's memories, most people are probably better with their memory than I am, the older I get. But it wasn't very long ago, Bill, that when I filled up my pickup with gas, it cost about half of what it does today.
Exactly.
I mean, that's real money.
Yeah.
And then that doubling in the cost of energy is embedded. At our ranch, our fuel costs went up. So our cost of producing the hay to feed our buffalo just doubled, ate into what little margin we had to call profit. People are feeling that. Yes. And for what's Biden done about it? He just canceled a bunch of leases on federal land again. I mean, we've got enormous resources, and I think it bears saying, Bill, nobody in the world produces fossil fuel energy cleaner, safer, more affordably than the United States of America.
Exactly.
And they want to put us out of business.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing that's so frustrating because that is so obvious, people that know. But the problem that we have here in America, Bob, is the people have allowed themselves to be dumbed down. They've been told what to believe by the mainstream media, by a president, Joe Biden, who's flat out lying to us, telling us that the green energy, theology is the way to go. And look what we've done. I mean, over the last decade or so, we've spent something like $6 trillion. And what have we got to show for it? Are we anywhere closer to realizing a full electrical system? I think maybe full, if you spell it OOL, then yes, I think we're probably closer to realizing that kind of full realization, but not the full that you would think. And what you mentioned earlier is that there's no really transition to be able to say, hey, look, there's light at the end of the tunnel here. If we just get over this hump within, a year or two, then maybe we could realize some definitive benefit. But this is a pipe dream. This is like Don Quixote chasing windmills, as far as I see.
Yeah, you're spot on, Bill. The whole energy situation. I mentioned I just read an article about my home state of Colorado and what it's done here. If you can imagine, Colorado, a state that has had an enormous amount of immigration for a long time. People love to live here because our climate's so great. They can't afford to live here now. Yeah. And you know why? It's because of these leftist policies.
Yeah.
What they have done, especially regarding energy and trying to electrify our whole state, people can't afford to even rent, much less buy a home. Mm-hmm. Our kids, they graduate from college, they've got to leave their home state and their home city because they can't afford to buy a home or even rent a home. It's really sad. And, elections have consequences. We've elected some leaders that we shouldn't have. You talked about pipe dreams. That's what they've been selling, and too many people have bought it. We all like Nirvana. Sure, if they promise it, maybe they can deliver. Well, we've seen the evidence. Yeah. It's not Nirvana, and America deserves better. Hopefully, we wake up.
They need to wake up, Bob, because we are beyond that tipping point. And what happens when you're beyond the tipping point? It moves with much more rapidity. Look at what's happened just in the last couple of years, Bob. And this is what I see is that fulcrum has gone, and we're on the downside heading fast unless we can find some way to, pull the brakes on this deal, because Joe Biden and the Marxist Democrats have got a stronghold on our government. They have opened up the Treasury. They've exacerbated the issues of inflation. And I think probably kind of like in the years of Obama, you'll finally get the economic experts to go, well, Bill, if the truth be known, we're actually in recession for the last 6 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You mentioned earlier that I was a businessman, and that kind of introduction you gave me, and part of that was running a bank for a dozen or so years, and we happened to be in a pretty good stretch. The economy was expanding, wages were good, business activity was great, so it was a good time to be in banking. But I always reminded my staff, especially the lenders, people that were kind of making the policy and implementing. I said, the uphill side of a growing economy, the uphill side is kind of nice to ride, but that downhill slope is always a lot steeper.
That's right.
You just talked about that, and you're absolutely correct. I'm fearful as well. Nobody seems to want to talk, frankly, hardly anybody on either side of the aisle, Republican or Democrat, about this enormous debt, about an annual federal budget and too many state budgets that are in trouble. Mm-hmm. I mean, in my own state, again, and we're not unique in this, I think we're like a lot of states, we got to pretend that the pension plans.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes.
That the promises that our state government has made, in addition to the federal government, but our state government, to stay there for a minute, they keep them off balance sheet, like they don't exist. And we're talking about tens of billions of dollars. And of course, at the federal level, it's trillions. Mm-hmm. Put a T on it. Those chickens are going to come home to roost at some point, Bill. And right now, with rising interest rates, the old banker in me, I understand the impact of that. When you're pushing the amount of debt, 33 trillion or so, and refinancing a lot of that on a regular basis, and interest rates go up 2 or 3 or 4%, as they have done to finance that debt, who ends up paying it? We do. The taxpayers.
Right.
So interest on our debt is chewing up an even bigger portion of our federal budget year after year. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are all predicted, and this is simple arithmetic. It's not and not some rocket science stuff. This is simple arithmetic. They're all predicted to go, or projected to be insolvent within a decade, plus or minus.
Right.
And nobody seems to be able to even put together a handful of people, much less a majority of Congress, to deal with the obvious challenges in front of them.
Well, here we are. I mean, our interest rate just on that debt of $33 trillion is approximating what we pay for our military, Bob.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that.
Yes. No, you're absolutely correct. And year after year, we've been whittling down what we're doing with our military, how we're supporting our military. We're having trouble meeting recruiting levels. We're reducing our ammunition. We're reducing our fleet. We're reducing our aircraft, much of which is horribly aged and in need of significant upgrade. And yet every year it seems like we spend less of our GDP on our military. We're down about 3% now, Bill. And before this day's over, I certainly hope it doesn't happen, but we're now involved in wars on two fronts, in the Middle East and in Ukraine. And I hope I'm wrong, but I got to believe that Xi Jinping is probably looking at Taiwan and maybe drooling a little bit at the mouth.
Well, you got to know that.
Be an opportune time.
Yeah, look at the aggressive moves he's been doing in the South China Sea.
Absolutely.
He keeps, kind of strafing Taiwan there, just to kind of hope that maybe there might be something that would ignite and give him an excuse and give him some plausible deniability, because that's what these aggressors always do. They find a way to flip the script, just like Hamas is flipping the script. I mean, they go in and they cross over into Israel, decapitate children, burn them alive, rape the women, and kill 260 festival goers and Holocaust victims, and that, and somehow we're supposed to believe that Hamas are the victims here. But that's what they do all the time.
This is I struggle to find words to describe what happened a week ago in Israel, 10 days almost now ago. Barbaric doesn't do it. Brutal isn't enough. It is, I heard somebody say medieval. I don't know that they were ever that bad in the medieval days. I mean, they specifically, it's quite one thing, and I'm not forgiving it by any stretch, but typically Hamas would fire rockets at something that they could at least pretend was a military installation.
Right.
That had some sort of military significance to Israel. In this one, they specifically targeted teenagers, women, grandmothers, and then little babies.
Yeah.
Babies. And you can say what you want about the Palestinians, and I hope and pray and fully expect that there's some that I guess we would characterized as innocent civilians, but the ones we've seen, and way too many of what we have seen, have been civilians filming these mutilations, these atrocities, and celebrating them. So, whose side are they on? And
exactly.
I remember an American president after 9/11 here said pretty correctly, I think quite correctly, look, you got to decide, either you're with us or you're with the terrorists.
That's
right.
If
you're with the terrorists, we're coming after you. That's the only way to root this out. And
well, this is the problem with evil. It is so shocking, Bob. People, everyday reasonable people just seem to ignore and just not quite have a capacity to understand evil. But I can say this, that those IDF soldiers, for example, who the general said that they were purposely taking them through these areas. They wanted the soldiers to see the devastation, to see it firsthand for themselves, so that it would clarify the narrative, because there is that counter narrative out there. A lot of misinformation, disinformation. Last weekend, I was looking at just a documentary and all the disinformation that was being put out there by Hamas and Iran and other Marxists out there, even people within our own country. And they were using footage that had nothing to do or related directly to what happened on that Saturday. And so this is what happens with social media. It does open things up, but you have to make sure that, as we say on the show all the time, Bob, you got to own your own knowledge. Don't take our word for it. Hopefully we spur you on and motivate you, say, hey, I'm going to check that out, so that you know that you know. And these IDF soldiers, after going through the carnage and the horrific evidence, Bob, I don't know how you unsee that. They will live with the sight of that kind of human devastation till the day they die.
And for leaders, and it's happened with our leadership here in America, to call on Israel for restraint, for a ceasefire. I mean, think back to how we felt on 9/12.
Yes, exactly.
And if somebody would have said, "Oh well, bad things happen to good people, and let's just calm down here and everybody behave and go to their respective corner," of course we wouldn't have done that. And what happened in Israel, they just, again, doing simple arithmetic, this would have been like 10 times, maybe a dozen times the carnage from our 9/11 population comparison allowing there. This was and again, the brutality, just unbelievable. So yeah, Hamas has got to come in, and this shouldn't come as a surprise. Bill, when I was in Congress about 20 years ago now, as much as Al Qaeda was obviously on all of our minds after 9/11,
exactly,
our intelligence officials already then said the real bad guys, the worst of the bad guys, Al Qaeda certainly deserved a whole lot of the attention, but the worst of the worst was Hezbollah and Hamas.
Yeah.
And who are we dealing with right now? Hezbollah and Hamas, and their godfather, Iran. I mean, that's where it's all coming from. And for our government, I heard Biden say, "Well, we don't have any direct evidence." Well, Joe, you ought to wake up in the morning and read your own classified briefings, because I'm sure that it's in his classified briefings that Iran is still supporting terror networks all over the world, and primary among them are Hezbollah and Hamas.
90%, Bob. 90%. I mean, and this isn't stuff that you just found out a month ago. For decades, we've known this. We've known Iran has been sponsoring terrorism. This is what the big shock was. Remember when Obama, in the dark of night, sent over the pallet of cash, to Iran, and then we find out. $1 billion+. And then we find out, okay, so then we do this prisoner exchange, $6 billion. And then as if that's not enough, we find out that on the Obama-Biden team is a mole of sense, somebody who is highly sympathetic to the Iranian cause, and he lifts the sanctions on oil. And so Iran has secretly been making billions of dollars, to the tune they're estimating anywhere from 60 to $100 billion since this was done by our own government officials, Bob.
You bet. Well, don't forget the Iran nuclear deal.
Oh yeah.
Obama was so proud of that. Trump rescinded it immediately, thankfully. And the first thing Biden does when he shows up in the Oval Office is put it back in place and make nice with the Iranians.
But Bob, hang on a second, just a minute on the nuclear deal. If you remember, it was one of the big lies that you could keep your doctor, right? I mean, there's so many endless lies that are part of the Obama administration. The other part was that Iran, we're doing this so Iran will never go nuclear. And you're going, okay, but the plan is for them, you've laid it out, maybe not nuclear tomorrow, but there's going to be a sunset to this deal, and they are set up to go nuclear. So how is this not going to make them go nuclear again?
Precisely. The best, even if it would have worked, at best it would have slowed down their achieving nuclear capability. Mm-hmm. That's the best. I asked one of our Democrat United States senators just before he cast his vote which way he was going to vote. Well, I haven't decided yet, he said. Well, I said, I think you have decided and you don't want to tell me. This was in a group setting. And I challenged him. I said, Michael, this is Senator Michael Bennett. Mm-hmm. I said, Michael, explain to me what part of death to America, death to Israel you don't understand. I said, I think they're quite serious. Right. And if you think that somehow we can negotiate with, believe in what they say, shake hands and trust in the deal with the Iranians, I said, you're sadly mistaken, and there will be a price to pay. Israel just paid the price. Yeah. And hopefully we don't get to have to do the same. I'm sure you know this, Bill, but decades ago, this goes back 20 plus years, we had already identified 19 Hezbollah cells in American cities. Some of our largest cities already had active Hezbollah cells. Yeah. And that's not to count Hamas. And they haven't gotten less. And how many people we've been letting over the border? Scores of them that we don't know what they're coming here for. And they're of Syrian descent. They're from Venezuelan descent. Many of them coming through South America.
You got China.
There were Arabs coming through South America. They're not coming here to flip burgers into mow lawns. No. And so someday we're going to have to deal and reconcile that pretty significant problem too.
Well, no doubt about it. We're talking with former Colorado Congressman and businessman Bob Beaupre. Bob, speaking of the border, how wide open it is, and you just mentioned a couple of things, these networks, but we haven't even begun to even talk about the cartels. Right. I saw a map here, month before last, that showed the cartel tentacles in the United States. Just about every state. I think there's only 8 states where cartels do not have an operation within the state. They're deep into this country. So you look at all the danger that's coming in from the Middle East, overseas, communist countries. And if you think not, I mean, all you got to do is look at the video and the response of these young kids in these university campuses. I know some people want to say, oh, well, it's those doggone professors, they've indoctrinated these kids. Going, no, you don't understand. We have been importing hatred into this country. These kids, Bob, as you know, they were raised on hating Israel, hating America. This has been part of their dogma, as Dianne Feinstein would refer to it. It's part of their worldview. And you saw it on full display the past 9-10 days after Hamas went after and brutally murdered 1,300 Israelis.
Yeah, it was on full display on too many campuses and too many cities, including my own Denver.
Yes.
We actually had one of our state legislators show up at the pro-Hamas rally. One of our state legislators.
Yeah.
Since, of course, apologized, but oh well.
Yeah.
Damage done. I keep trying to understand, Bill, this hate America cycle that we seem to be in. I just read a book that says that this is part of the normal cycle of humanity, that we go through a building cycle, then we go through a kind of fat and sassy cycle, and then we go through a decline and finally a crisis cycle. And according to him, the professor that studies this stuff, he believes we're in that crisis phase, and precisely in that phase, people kind of turn on themselves. Mm-hmm. Remember Abraham Lincoln, who famously said, "If America ever fails, it won't be by an attack from outside.
No, inside.
We'll commit suicide.
Exactly.
We'll kill ourselves." Mm-hmm. And I hope and pray that does not happen. But you look at some of what we deal with in so-called leadership now. We look at our young population on the campuses and what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're believing, and you have to wonder how much longer. It's time for all of us to love this country and have benefited from this country, to take further stock and do all we can to turn the tide.
Well, when you go back to the root of the issue, Bob, and what you're suggesting, and even this professor is, it really comes down to what John Adams said, and that is our Constitution was designed for a moral and righteous people, and connected to those key elements is a belief in God. Here we are. I mean, when you and I were growing up, 90% of the country believed in God. Now it's down under 70%. And so look what's happening. The results of us turning our back on God, this country, we have the manifestation of all sorts of evil, some disconnect from common sense and reality. I mean, we look at our government and we go, wait a minute, how does it make sense to open up the border and let 6-7 million people come in when you're $33 trillion in debt? Who's going to pay for this stuff? Joe, did you get so much money with the Biden brand that you can offset the expenses of letting these future Democrat voters come in mass into our country, along with, what they hold in their hearts and their discontent and their hatred for America? And again, when you look back in terms of the hatred issue, in my study in the Middle East, they refer to it as ancient hatred. There's no cycle there. It is just constant. It's been going on for thousands of years.
Sure.
Where they just hate. They hate Israel. They hate America. And how can you possibly eradicate that? All you can do is do the best you can, that when you see its head raising up, that you lop its head off, just like what Israel's about ready to do to Hamas. And understand, I know Barack Obama goes, well, what is it, like whack-a-mole? Well, maybe to a degree it is a little bit like whack-a-mole, because when the mole raises its head, you got to lop it off, just like whether we're talking in the South there with Hamas, you got Hezbollah, which is stronger yet, probably 2-3 times stronger than Hamas. And of course, backed by, again, Iran, with all these missiles and the development, the missile sophistication, I'm told by IDF soldiers and by generals, Bob, much more sophisticated coming from the north as opposed to what's coming from the south. So the Iron Dome is being stretched. America is sending munitions to reinforce and do what they can. Sadly, again, Biden, because of his lukewarm commitment, doesn't understand, okay, we send ships there off of, off the coast of Israel there, but we need ships on the other side that are within striking distance of Iran to hold them in check. It almost seems like, it kind of reminds me, one time when I was, I'd gone down to Acapulco and they had all these soldiers with guns, and I'm going, wow, that's bizarre. And I said, who are they here to protect? And they said, well, it's not, believe it or not, it's not the tourists. You think it's the tourists. No, it is, it's the mal players there in the area. And so here it is. I'm seeing Joe Biden. I mean, you're kind of like saying, okay, you're offering a little bit of threat, but who are you there? Are you there to hold Israel in check? Because already they're backing off, and Joe Biden is making statements like, oh gosh, maybe, maybe you shouldn't be so hard on Hamas. Maybe, we don't have all the facts yet. And I mean, it's just absurd. But again, Bob, the difference, just like you said, in 9/11, we saw it happening here in our country, just like in Hawaii and Pearl Harbor. We saw it happen on our homeland, and nobody else from the outside can tell us what to do or how we're supposed to feel. And we're in a similar situation towards Israel. This is their pain, their suffering, their people. And we either are going to back them to the fullest. I say even more so than the backing that we're offering and have been offering to Ukraine. Israel is our number one ally, and they take priority, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I very much concur with everything you just said. Yeah, this would be akin, to back off of our support of Israel would be akin to Tony Blair in the wake of 9/11, saying, "Well, America maybe ought to exercise some restraint and we'll circle Parliament up and maybe we'll get back to you in a few weeks and see how much we can support you, if at all." No, he jumped in with both feet and was right there as our best friend, and
exactly
that's how best friends treat each other. You mentioned the God that created us and the God that's blessed America so many times in the past, Bill, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit further. I think for me, I know you're a student of the Bible. I am as well. Obviously, the Jewish people kind of wrote the Old Testament. They're the whole focus of it. And if I remember the lessons well, the God that did create all of us, and the God that we certainly prayed to after 9/11, during World War II, during our Revolutionary War, in times of need, it seems like America suddenly finds religion again. Funny how that works. But it was God who, when the Jewish people drifted away, and they did numerous occasions, drifted away from him and went back to idol worship, or and he'd get their attention, and bad things happened, and they were taken captive to Egypt, or they were taken captive to Babylon. But at their greatest moments, they were standing right there with him.
Exactly.
I know it's not fashionable right now, for some reason in America, to wear your faith on your sleeve, but it's that faith that we were founded on as a nation. It's that faith that has seen us reasons than most of us.
Well, Bob, you're exactly right. I mean, the situation, like, you're referring to, like, particularly in the book of Judges, it was a cycle that happened time and again. People, in their prosperity, the height of the prosperity, all of a sudden they would take credit, and they would see things according to their own eyes and turn their back on God, so to speak. And so it would roll until God said, "Okay, I've had enough of that." And he would send calamity. He would send somebody to come in and imprison them. And they'd be in prison. They'd be held hostage and suffering. And then they'd cry out to God. God, in his faithfulness and mercy, would send a prophet, send a leader to come in and deliver them, from their calamity. And then people again would start to do well, and they would go into the same cycle. And America has done the same thing. I mean, it's just the nature of humanity. But fortunately, we have the nature of God that is without change. He is a merciful God, and he wants us to turn back. And I've been saying and praying that maybe we could have a Nineveh moment. When Nineveh got the message that God was not happy with them, they repented and they came back to God. This is the only hope that we have, Bob. It's not going to be from some party, some political party. We have got to get the foundation set. I've been saying time and again, we've got to return to first principles. These first principles that gave us this great American idea, that inspired John Winthrop to refer to that light on a hill, that hill that would attract, that light that would go forth to all nations and attract other nations to seek the God of Abraham, so that it would go well for them. And for many years, we were that hill and that shining example. But the fact of the matter is that there will always be, just like, if it could happen in the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
it's going to happen here too, that you're going to have Satan, you're going to have evil raise its head and come against those things that are godly. And that's the cycle that we will be on and what we have to live with. But those of faith need to stay close to the word of God. They need to stay close to God, continue to pray. And right now, especially pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This is scriptural, that we would do this, and that we would pray that by God's grace and mercy, we would return to first principles, come back to God, and benefit from his open arms and his willingness to accept us back into the fold.
Very well said. I think many of our people, especially what we've seen on the campuses of late, need to have a lesson in the difference between good and evil, and that it actually exists.
Right.
In this age of relativism, a lot of people don't want to talk about real evil. But throughout all of history, and the Bible's a pretty good history book.
Yes.
When evil reared its head, God's people certainly could point it out and knew what to do with it. You defeat it.
Yeah.
And you defeat it by any means you have to do. That's why I think we have, rather than second guessing Israel, chastising Israel, suggesting Israel somehow restrain itself back down, we need to understand what they've gone through, and that they are faced with absolutely pure evil.
Exactly.
Evil needs to be eradicated, and we need to support them.
Yeah. If not, what else? I mean, you're going to continue to live with it. I mean, they have bent over backwards. It's not like, they've only supported Hamas for this is going on for years. I mean, they turned over the Gaza in 2005.
That's right.
And they've suffered every day since. And it has risen to this point to where now it's insufferable. And after all the good that has been extended to Hamas from the United Nations, which we have contributed to, Israel has supported in hopes that they would turn from their evil ways, but they can't help themselves because the doctrine and what they're committed to, Bob. And again, people need to understand, like with the PLO and Yasser Arafat, I mean, it was clear with the Palestinians. They said, you cannot negotiate with Israel. If we don't get 100% of any kind of negotiation, then forget it. We don't want to. And if anybody accepts less than 100%, their family should be murdered on the spot. And 100% means that Israel would no longer exist. It's not that Israel would go off and find some new desert land out in the Jordan somewhere. No, and that's not enough for them. They want Israel to be totally vanquished.
Correct. That's Hamas's stated objective.
Well, that's Hamas. That's the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yep,
that is these radical Arab Muslims out there. That's the way they feel. So, again, if they tell you, Bob, if they tell you we want you dead, what else? What else can you say? I mean, you got to take them for what they're saying that about Israel. They're saying that about America.
As I said, that's exactly the question I put to our United States Senator Bennett.
Yeah.
What part of death to America, death to Israel don't you understand?
Yeah.
That is their stated goal, and the only way to deal with it. That's why I had a problem with the Iranian nuclear deal. It's why I have a problem sending them money. It's why I have a problem trusting them. They are the epitome of evil right now. And until you're objective and face that, you may not like reality, Bill, but if you're in leadership, you got to deal with it.
Exactly.
And we need we need a little bit better leadership in that regard for sure right now.
Well, experience defines preference. We had 4 years, I think, of some good years there, all things considered, except for COVID. Not necessarily Donald Trump's fault. I get that. You can be critical of certain things about it, but we were energy independent. Our border was secure. Putin was in check. He wasn't sending any missiles. He wasn't invading Ukraine.
Right.
President Xi was behaving himself. And, oh yeah, by the way, in order to level out the marketing field, because China was taking so unfair advantage of American business. We were getting $400 billion in sanctions. And, Joe Biden, in his brilliance and wisdom, eradicated all that. Bob, we got about a minute left. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you summarize and bring us home and wrap it up.
We've been through many difficult times as a nation, especially on our path to becoming the world's greatest nation. I still firmly believe that is within our DNA, that's in our soul. But it is a time for us to take stock of who we are as individuals, who we are collectively as a society, who we are as a political party. I'm a Republican. I think our party's got a lot of growing up to do, a lot of reform to do, a lot of repair to do. But no time like the present. Winston Churchill, another guy I admire a lot, said one time that you can always count on America to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. I'd like to think we're about to the point of having tried all the bad ideas. Right. We got to get on with some good ideas. It's time to start.
Amen to that. He's the former Colorado Congressman and businessman. Bob Beaupre has been our guest. Bob, thank you so much for being with us.
It's always a pleasure, Bill. God bless you.
God bless you. Our thanks to Bob Beaupre for being with us today. For more information to be a part of this mighty movement to return to God and save our country, check it out, BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a great day.